Yay, thank you for showing up.
Oh, well, it's good to see you. Thanks for organising it.
I'm not sure if there's going to be anybody else because
Okay.
there weren't many people asked me for login info, so it might just be me and you.
Okay.
Can you hear me
All right.
okay?
Yeah, I can. I can fine. Yeah. How about you?
Yes, you're loud and clear. And then
Good.
just to clear with you, do you mind if I post this video afterwards on the group so that others can also benefit from the conversation?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So what is your background with lino printing?
I've been lino printing for about 10 years,
Okay,
uh, mostly on paper.
okay,
Um, so I did a short course at college and loved it, and then did a longer course at college and loved it even more.
okay.
Um, and I still print on paper, but I'm also a quilter. So
Ah,
I wanted to combine the two, and I've
okay,
started to print on fabric a bit and then patchwork it.
okay, okay. And
Mm.
I bet you that you're finding that equally addictive.
I am. I'm finding it really addictive. Yeah, I can't keep up with the ideas,
Okay,
which is lovely.
okay.
Yeah.
I discovered lino prints in 1993 and I'm still fascinated with the process.
So you have a very long, you have a lot of experience printing on fabric, don't you?
I
From
do.
what I've read.
I did a lot of printing between 1993 and 2008 for garments that I was selling at markets and also for the South African fashion industry. I worked for a period of time into the fashion space, which was quite interesting because we could do some really quick, effective things for fashion designers a few days before a collection had to be on the catwalk.
Mm.
So it's really versatile. And then since then, I've done a lot of teaching, and I've published 2 books. The one book had a section on lino printing in, and I'm still totally fascinated with it. I always have a lino block on the go somewhere that I'm carving, and I'm almost always printing something. When at the moment I'm not printing because my printing stuff is in storage, and I live far from our storage unit. We moved and then lockdown of COVID-19 hit us. So I've
Mm.
not been able to get my hands on my inks.
Oh
Um,
no.
it's quite frustrating. I'm missing them the
Yeah.
most of all my craft supplies is my ink. And I'm pretty certain that when I finally get my ink down here, there'll be a flurry of activity.
All of that cooped up energy and those ideas that you've been waiting to get out.
Yes, and also I've made a couple of new stamps that I want to try out. I haven't, I've made them and now I'm sitting looking at them. It's very frustrating.
Oh, that's frustrating.
Yeah. And
Mm.
tell us more about what you do. The printing on paper, do you do reduction prints?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah. So I do some black and white, but I really like reduction prints. And I'm trying to make them a lot more painterly now. So um, I'm starting to introduce monotype techniques into some of the layers or selective wiping of the ink.
Okay.
Um, so so I can play around with them a bit more.
Okay.
So I quite like the combination of the creativity and the discipline of the reduction print.
Yes. Yes. Reduction printing has always fascinated me and it's something I've never tried.
It's quite nerve-wracking.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
Yes, that's what puts
um,
me off.
yeah, it is tricky. I've got a couple that I've stalled on halfway through, and I'm so afraid of making a mistake, especially
Okay.
later when you start to get a bit, maybe a bit sort of tired.
Yes.
If you're printing quite a few of
Yes.
each layer, it's easy just to kind of lose concentration and muck it up later
Yes.
down the
Yes.
track.
Yes.
Yeah, but then I mean, magical things happen as well. So um, you know, it's a fun technique.
And do you sell your prints?
I do, yeah, mostly through friends, occasionally through through pop-up shops or word of mouth.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't got a website yet, but it's
Okay.
in the pipeline.
Okay. And have you thought of maybe just doing a Facebook page in the meantime?
I have. I
Okay.
have got a Facebook page. It's a little bit neglected at the moment. I need to post some more recent work on it.
Okay. Okay. And the prints on fabric for quilts, tell us more about that.
Well, I started. I've got interested in these circular shapes, and I keep doing sort of iterations of those. So either arch shapes or made out of hexagons, and I'm printing lots of lines on them. Maybe I should have got some to show you, but I'll see if I can just have a little wander with my laptop, and then I can show you some of the things that I've been working on. So I've been just doing the same kind of shapes and the same kind of patterns again and again of parallel lines. If I can show you one of these, it might give you an idea. Does that come through?
Oh,
okay?
yum.
So these are all printed with lino, and I've started with white linen there, and it's kind of gets progressively darker as I go on. So some of the printing you can't actually even see, and then that's patchworked into, that's sort of sewn into a piece of fabric. So I have another one hiding behind some flowers up here. Now, I'm not sure if you can see that properly.
I can see your air conditioning unit.
Oh, I didn't make that. There we go.
Oh
How's
my,
that?
look at that.
So,
That's beautiful.
So you probably can't see the lines very much, but that's got similar parallel lines.
Yes.
Printed with lino.
Yes. Yes.
So
that's amazing. It's actually amazing how effective just simple parallel lines can be.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm quite pleased with them. They seem to have quite a lot of lovely texture. And I've been making bigger pieces that are either like a panorama, as you'd see a landscape all the way around you, or inspired by bushfires, with the black parallel lines becoming the burnt tree trunks in a landscape. So it's just those simple little lines just kind of grabbed me, and I keep playing around with them.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it because I'm sure that it'll be an inspiration for people who are watching who feel that they're not quite ready to do fancy patterns or anything like that, that you really can achieve really stunning results with some very simple concepts.
Yeah, I think so. I started out trying to print pictures onto fabric, onto like canvas bags, and I didn't really have the right inks and the right technique to begin with anyway. But I found that I just then became too obsessed with trying to get the picture to look good on the fabric, whereas when I play around with shapes like this, something much more interesting happens. And it's like I've seen in your work, when you print over pattern textiles with another pattern, something kind of magical happens with that, and it's very interesting. And I think if you were just trying to print one picture, that wouldn't happen. It's the repetition and the pattern that you've got going there that does something really great.
Definitely. I way prefer random adventures to very, very contrived work. When I try and make it perfect, I'm bound to mess it up.
Yeah, it's too much pressure, isn't it? And it kind of it stifles you a little bit because you're so worried about making it perfect that you can't play to the same extent.
You've also made a very valid point that when you take that pressure away and you just allow yourself some time to practice and play, then you start to perfect your printing technique. I think a lot of beginners try and cram too much into that first exercise. It's like, I want my pattern, my design to be perfect. I want my
Mm.
print quality to be perfect. I want it all to be perfect the first time I do it. And then when it doesn't work, I'm never trying it again. Whereas,
Yeah.
you know, if you could just let yourself go enough to maybe make some imperfect prints, practice getting the ink texture and consistency right, you know, and
Mm.
not worry about what your pattern looks like, your design looks like.
Yeah.
And maybe just separate those things into different days and different exercises before
Yeah.
you try and get all of that lined up in one perfect work just right at the start of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much going on,
Mm,
um, and so much to learn that, yeah, it's way too much pressure. It's good to just play around and have some fun.
mm. What's your favorite part of the process?
Probably dreaming up new ideas,
Okay.
um, I think, and drawing them out in my sketchbook. I find very relaxing. Um, but I mean, I enjoy the printing as well. You know, I put something on the radio, and there's something very meditative about printing on fabric. And I don't really get that when I print on paper because I am so worried about the picture and about the picture coming out right. Whereas when I'm printing on fabric, if I'm doing something, you know, like the piece on the wall that I showed you, and I have 100 hexagons to print, then I just need to kind of, I can't hurry through it. I just slow down and get into a rhythm,
Mm,
and that's lovely.
mm, mm. That's very interesting that you say that printing on fabric is more therapeutic than printing on paper.
Yeah, I think so. I think I put a lot of pressure on myself when I print on paper,
Mm, mm,
um, and I I'm concerned with making a nice picture, and I try not to be, but
mm,
it's there. Um, Whereas with fabric, I know that, um, because I tend to patchwork things as well.
mm,
If one goes wrong, it doesn't matter because I'm printing dozens of these pieces to
mm,
sew back together. So that's just taking the pressure off to begin with anyway.
mm,
And sometimes I find that I come back and I look at those pieces that I thought went wrong, and actually they're good. I like them. I like the
mm,
variation in tone or pressure or whatever.
mm. Or you
Um,
can use them somewhere else.
yeah,
They fill
absolutely.
a different gap. I've
Yeah.
always felt that printing on white paper is actually unforgiving.
Yes, it is. It
Fabric is
is.
way more forgiving. It moves
Mm.
it, and even if you print something skew, if you cut it into a garment and put the skew bit under the armpit, nobody will ever see it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Mm,
I'm surprised by how forgiving it is as well.
mm,
Um, it's lovely.
mm,
But I've always wondered when how you go. Like when I've seen one of your big pieces of cloth,
mm.
that how your nerves hold up when you're kind of part way through one of these pieces. Um, every time you place the block, do you worry about getting it wrong at some point, and then do you feel like you would ruin the whole piece, or do you have ways to kind of salvage it if it
So,
isn't
so
quite
my secret is actually that I went through the nerve-wracking process when I was manufacturing for the fashion industry.
right? Mm,
So there was zero tolerance for getting anything wrong when I was
mm,
doing that kind of work. So I no longer manufacture for deadlines or for people who are paying for stuff that that they've ordered specifically. Because I used to make bespoke work, so they'd tell me what they wanted, and then we had to make that.
mm,
And I didn't actually last very long in that industry. After 6 years, my nerves were burned out
mm,
because I just couldn't anymore. I was like, I can't live with this pressure, because also when you produce a piece in that kind of fashion, then you don't get paid at the end of it if there's anything wrong with it.
right.
And very often I would work on a designer's fabric, so they would give me their fabric to work on, and I'd have one piece in one shot. So now that I'm working on the other side of the process, these days, everything I make is for me. And in fact, many of the fabrics that you see in the pictures on the social networks at the moment are upcycled textiles. So they
Mm,
came from a deceased estate.
right.
They would have been thrown away.
Mm,
They would have gone into the landfill. So
yeah.
for me, it doesn't matter what I do with them anymore. And I have to say that my enjoyment in the process has increased exponentially since
Mm,
I'm no longer making to sell. And it's helped me to be more forgiving about the work. So I really recommend to anybody who's thinking of making to sell that you make a finished item and then sell what you've made. Rather than saying to somebody, I'll make you something bespoke, what do you want to order? And I'll make to that specification.
that's a great point. Yeah.
Two very different mindsets, you know, and that extra pressure can make or break you. Even if you get it right, just the nerves, it affects your quality of life.
Mm.
Um,
Making face masks a few weeks ago,
mm,
to sell to friends and then friends of friends and then complete strangers. Um, and I found it so nerve-wracking. It was only a couple of weeks that I was doing this,
mm,
but I suddenly had a load of orders, and just the idea that I was selling them, and if they went wrong, I had to redo them. I couldn't
mm,
just stop,
mm,
and you know, worrying about whether the fit was okay, whether my seams were straight, all that kind of stuff. I mean,
mm,
I can imagine how hard that would be if you're doing that all of the time
mm,
to sort of very exacting standards.
mm,
Would that would be exhausting.
Oh God,
And
and my
I
work.
wished I'd sorry.
Yes, you wished you'd.
I wished I'd just made the masks and then put them up for sale when I had them made,
Mm,
instead of taking orders
mm,
and, you know, then having to fulfill them.
mm, mm. Yeah, my special pet peeve was with the fashion designers would always come with a Pantone color match.
Mm,
And if we didn't get that color exactly according to that Pantone swatch that they had, that refused to pay.
mm,
And some of your inks change color when you heat set them.
mm.
So they might print perfectly. You've got a perfect color match and you put some heat on them and they'd shift ever so slightly, and now the designer doesn't want to pay for them. So it was particularly nerve-wracking.
Mm,
I,
yeah.
I once had a designer, we spent 3 weeks color sampling for her to eventually get the color exactly spot on. We'd done a sample for her and she said, I like that, but the color's not spot on. And then I spent another 3 weeks getting the exact shade right and getting it to the perfect match. And then she looked at it at the end and said, oh no, your original sample had more life.
Oh, oh, that,
You know, and
yeah.
just those experiences taught me that I would never ever do that kind of production ever again. Uh,
Mm,
if I ever had to mass produce again, I would make stuff and you buy what I've got finished.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. And where do you
yeah.
see your quilts going? What's your next progression from your parallel lines? I'm certain you've got something planned.
I have. Well, I'm not sure exactly where yet, but I've got a series um, of small, medium quilts planned,
Mm,
and I'd like to make some huge ones. I don't know where I want to show them, but I would like to show them at some point.
okay,
And I'm also making a piece. I live in a small town in rural Victoria in Australia,
okay.
and we have a contemporary arts festival here every 2 years. And I'm making a piece for a local artist, um, to go with his paintings,
Mm,
which is going to have some of the printed patchwork on it as well. So I'm very excited about that.
that sounds
Um,
fabulous. I hope we see pictures in the group.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to share them.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be
And
great.
I'd love to see more pictures of your quilts in the group as well. I think they'll inspire people, even your work in progress if you want to. It doesn't have to be finished pictures.
Yeah, sure.
I think close-ups even of those your parallel lines are so perfect.
They were fun to carve, actually. Yeah, they're quite they're a bit wonky. I didn't want them to be too straight.
Yes,
Um, so they've got a little bit of the hand carved look
yes.
in there. But when you see them all together, then you know you do get the parallel kind of effect.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I found it quite hard to carve them because I was using a sort of soft cut um, material, and so I normally use the grey battleship lino to
Okay.
carve the paper, which I like for detail because it's quite hard. But for these, I was using a sort of rubbery, I think it's an SD soft carved material, and I find that quite hard to carve lots of detail because it just moves out of the way. Instead of cutting,
Mm.
even with very sharp tools, it
Mm.
can just sort of move when I was
Mm.
trying to carve parallel lines. So
Mm.
um, that was an extra bit of challenge.
And have you ever worked on the old-fashioned liner that's made out of the linseed oil on the Hessian base?
Yes, that's the sort I use for the paper, the
Okay.
grey. Well, we get a grey stuff here with a Hessian back. It used to be
Okay.
manufactured by a company called Silk Cut,
Okay. Okay. But don't you
and
find
I
that
like that stuff.
that one's sometimes a little bit gritty? It's I don't know. It's not quite as smooth as the rubber.
Um, it's not quite, but I like the way it carves. I find it quite, yeah, I find it easier for paper,
Hmm.
and I find the plasticity of the rubber one. Sometimes I end up kind of with tails when I want to cut a piece
Yes.
off. It doesn't
Yes.
quite come away, and it's a different style of carving, I suppose, that you just need to get used to.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, but I'm surprised how well, because the rubber feels quite soft. I'm
Mhm.
surprised how well it held up when I printed. So I was expecting a bit of a blurry mess when I first did some of those parallel lines, and
Okay.
actually they came out much crisper than I expected.
Okay.
Using quite thin. I use Permaset aqua inks
Okay.
with a sponge roller on the soft matrix. I tried all of those things for the first time together,
Okay.
and actually they came out much better than I expected.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought that could have gone wrong, but yeah, it was quite good.
The sponge roller really is a lot easier than you kind of imagine when you first start with it.
It looks like it's going to be a right mess when you start rolling it up, and then you
Yes.
start rolling it out onto the plate, and
Yes.
it looks like you're just going to be filling in all the lines, and it's going to be oozing everywhere, but it actually works really well, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that sponge roller is my best friend. I find it. So the very, very first lino that I ever printed, I used an oil-based ink, and I printed meters and meters of cloth and draped them all over my flat. It was in the 1990s, and we had rain for a week or two, and they just didn't dry. It drove me
Oh,
nuts. And I said to my boyfriend at the time, I said, I have to try something else. And then he took me to a screen printing supplier. And once I tried the screen printing ink, I was sold. I was like, this is just so much easier than the oil-based ink that takes so long to dry.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I think I tried oil-based ink to begin with as well, and it took a long time.
mm,
And because I was using the sort of roller that you'd use for printing on paper, I wasn't
mm,
getting enough ink onto the block, so I was ending up with a very patchy block that wasn't printing very well
okay,
without a press.
okay.
Yeah.
And what's your printing setup like, where you print your fabrics?
I have a little studio. It's really my
Mm,
back spare bedroom, um, with a bench, um, a workbench set up, and I use some old wool, some just wool fabric
mm,
underneath the fabric to print on.
mm.
Um, and I have just a big piece of glass set up as my slab to roll the ink out on,
Okay.
which is next to where I print. And I just use, um, those clippy coat hangers, like for
Mm,
trousers, or the little ones that you get for drying socks. I just use
yes.
those to hang up all my pieces of fabric so
Ah,
it can get plenty of air.
okay.
So the whole room's festooned with bits of fabric every now and again.
Oh, it sounds
Um,
delicious.
yeah, it's lovely. It's so cheerful when I go in. I like. I'll just go in the evening just to have a little look to see how they're drying, because
Okay.
for some of them, I'll have loads of different grades of colour,
Yes.
which just looks lovely together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I
that's
have a press, an etching press, that I can use to print. But really, I just like the hand printing for the sort of size blocks I do.
mm,
I don't really need to print with a press.
mm.
So, it's very
And do
low
you
tech,
wood block mount your blocks, or do you use them just the way they are?
just the way they are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've thought about wood block mounting them. Maybe if I did the Hessian again,
Mm,
especially because with the Hessian, if you wash it,
mm,
then the Hessian shrinks and then it curls, and it's a
mm,
bit of a pain in the neck to work with.
mm,
But the rubber ones are so easy to wash up that I
mm,
just use them as they are.
mm.
And some of the rubber that I've used lately is quite thick. It's maybe half an inch, or a centimetre and a bit thick.
Okay.
So that makes it a bit easier to work with.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do you usually mount your blocks?
No, no, I never have. And sometimes people moan at me because I haven't. But I like the like that direct tactile thing.
Mm,
And also I find that it actually improves my registration because I can see exactly where the edge of the block is. If it's got
yeah.
that big clunky wood thing above it, then you can't really see.
Mm,
But it's very easy when it's thin like that to see where you've placed it is where it is. And then
yeah.
the other thing that I've discovered about it is that so along the way when I was doing work for the fashion industry, I would often get finished garments with um, like bodices with
Mm,
bones and lining and zips in.
mm,
And when you've got a rubber soft block, you can kind of mold it around all that anatomy and
mm.
still get a decent print out of it. Whereas if it's wood block
Yeah.
printed, then you can't.
Mm,
And I've even printed pantyhose with the rubber one because you can put the pantyhose on a mannequin leg and you can kind of shape mold the soft rubber around it,
mm.
which
Right.
if it was wood block mounted would not be possible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I personally prefer them without a block mounting, but I have
Mm.
spoken to some purists who've gone, oh my goodness, you're supposed to wood block mount them, and I'm like, oh no, that's just too much trouble for me, and
I
also
thought the
like
same thing. Yeah.
yes, also getting the wood block cut the right shape and the right size, and it
Mm.
becomes very complicated for me.
Yeah. Yeah. For
So,
me too. And if your surface isn't perfectly flat or
mm,
anything like that, then
mm,
yeah, it causes all kinds of problems.
mm,
Where, like you say, the soft rubber, can mold itself around.
mm, mm. So
So
you did,
how do you?
sorry?
Oh,
Yes?
sorry. How do you make your impression? Do you strike your plate, or do you roll the back, or do you press it? What do you do to
So I either use
press
a
the?
rubber brayer on the back
Mm-hmm.
or I hand press.
Yeah.
It'll depend. I find sometimes depending on the block, the rubber brayer can sometimes, if I press too hard, then it shifts it around a bit.
Yeah.
Um, if I'm not paying attention, but it also, so that's very, very long, narrow stamps will sometimes do that. Then I press too
Mm.
hard from the one side, and by the time I get to the other side, it's got a bit of a skid going. Um, so I really like to hand press. Most of my printing that you see is just hand pressed,
Mm.
really just hand pressed. I
Yeah.
find the secret is the ink, keeping it nice and creamy. So the screen printing ink that I use actually behaves quite well when you add water to it. I know a lot of the inks say you need extended bases and things like that, but the one that I use, I just spray bottle of water, and I just thin it out. And
Mm.
very often I'll use inks much thinner than you'd think, quite runny.
Mm.
Um, and they print quite well still. Uh, so I find that the secret is keeping the ink kind of creamy consistency and that it flows, and then of course the blanket underneath. So as
Mm.
long as you've got that padding underneath, then the hand press does a perfectly good job a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I find that it's really just, I think particularly when you practice printing big pieces, you get into that meditative space where it becomes repetitive, and that's when it starts to look very, very even. You know, anyone who
Yeah.
says to me, how do you get it right? I say, go and practice. It's
Mm.
all you're seeing in my work is 10,000 hours of mastery. I've just done lots of it.
Yeah.
And also I find that different people have different handles. You know, my sister also does lino block printing. I brought her into my business at one stage when we were printing for the fashion industry because we had so much printing work to do. And I was also doing a lot of dyeing at that stage. So eventually we kind of, I was doing all the dyeing and she was doing all the printing. And she's like a machine, but she's particularly strong.
Mm.
So her prints always had a different look to mine. Her prints were always darker, crisper than mine. And interestingly enough, at one point, she was sick or out of action or something, and we then tried to get somebody else to do the printing for us, and they couldn't replicate the ways hers looked. So we gave them exactly the same print block, the same inks, the same instructions, the same fabrics, but they couldn't replicate hers because it was just a different hand on the work.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so from one person to the next, it will be different, which is also, I think, you know, with screen printing, you can give a silk screen to a different person and the print will look more or less the same. But I think with lino printing, there is still a bit of a difference from one person to the next. And I love
Yeah.
that. I think it's beautiful that we all have a different handle.
Yeah, definitely.
But if
Yeah.
there's an expectation from a customer on the other side that they're going to get exactly the same thing that they got last week, then it's a bit of a challenge.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Whereas if they, you know, if they can see what they're getting, then that's
Yes.
fine because they can see the handmade
Yep.
nature of it in the hand of someone.
Yep. Yep. So, what do you enjoy most about our group?
Um, I like the community,
Okay.
and I like that it's dedicated to fabric.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I love that it's specifically lino prints on fabric.
Okay.
I like seeing the variety as well, the variety of different styles that
Mm,
people
mm,
use.
mm, mm.
Yeah, um, I think that's yeah, it gives me lots of ideas for different
Okay.
work I could be doing. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Are you on Lino Cut Friends?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Okay. That's a
Yeah.
fantastic group. But I also found that it was so paper focused
Mm,
that I just felt we needed a group for the conversation around fabrics, particularly around inks,
yes, definitely.
because the
Yeah.
paper community isn't really so interested in the conversations about heat setting and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And some of the paper community can be a bit funny about fabric and have ideas about, you know, oh no, lino cut should be on fabric and that's,
Mm,
you know.
mm, mm.
So it's nice just to talk about technical things that we want to talk about.
Yay. So I noticed that we're getting to the near the end of our time. Thank you so much for showing up and having this conversation with me today. I've really enjoyed meeting you in person, and
Thank
thank you for
you.
participating in our group. It's really awesome.
Thank you for setting up the group. It's
It's
a
a
great
pleasure.
group.
And
Yeah.
would you like to tell everybody watching where they can find you on Facebook or on Instagram or all of those places if they want to connect with you?
Yes. Now I'll be trying to desperately remember what my Facebook and Instagram names are. I am Sam.Trafford on Instagram and at Sam.Trafford Art on Facebook.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.